the Bible was written backwards. It's a YouTube channel. You know that one? I've watched it a little bit. I was talking to somebody recently who asked me to comment on something in one of the Dr. Monger, one of his videos, and he kind of teaches this stuff. But there was a comparison he was making between the Enuma Elish and Genesis, and I've been all over that. I've got a lot of work put into that. But there was something that he put in his video that is different than what I put in mine, and that's what I was asked to comment on. What I'm going to do is just sample his video right here, and I'll post a link to the full video below. But I'm going to sample it right here just to hear what he says, and then I'm going to bring up my own template and show you a different flow and discuss the reasons why I believe there should be a variation, and then discuss why we don't see it the same way. Okay, here's the sample.
The story goes basically like this. The two primordial gods are Apsu and Tiamat. Apsu represents the fresh water, while Tiamat is depicted as the salty waters of the seas. In the beginning, there is nothing, only these two water gods. They mix, and their mixture produces the other gods, first Lahmu and Lahamu, and then Anshar and Kishar. And from the two latter, Anu is born. And from Anu comes Ea, who you might know by the name Enki. And from Ea, then we have Marduk, who is the real hero of our story.
Okay, and very specifically the question was this: the Lamu and Lahamu, Anshar, Kishar parallel right in the beginning. And I'm going to go ahead and read how that comes about. I'll be using the Timothy Stephanie translation of the Enuma Elish. And here we go. Right in the beginning, Tablet 1. At a time when even the glories above had yet to be named, and unuttered was the word for the world which lay beneath, it was then that the first being Apsu, who was their source, and the progenitor Tiamat, the mother who gave birth to all, intermingled their waters, producing neither field nor marsh. At a time when no divine beings had yet come into existence, there were no names to be spoken and no fates pronounced. Okay, so this is early on, before in the human life cycle. We have not yet developed and begin. There's nothing named. We're not a blip on the radar yet. The first thing that happens, though, is but the gods were given birth within those intermixing waves. The first were Lamu and Lahamu. That is the emergence of us if we use it on a human life template. Their names were spoken, but once they had fully grown and become mature of form, then were born Anshar and Kishar, and they outshone them, and so many days passed by and many years were counted, their first son being Anu, being as great as any of his forebears. Okay, what you see right there as you look at it, it doesn't say. It just says, then the first were Lamu and Lahamu. Their names were spoken, but once they had fully grown and become mature of form, then were born Anshar and Kishar, and they outshone them. Now, if you look at his interpretation, you see Apsu, Tiamat, first was Lamu and Lahamu, and then were born Anshar and Kishar. I don't see anything wrong with what he did based on what I read. There's not a thing wrong with it. However, if you go to play that out in the psyche and it becomes sequential in the human life cycle, that division can't be there. In fact, let's jump ahead. I'm going to read something from Tablet 3. This is as we're getting into the point where we are now emerging into the healing process. Marduk, who is the called person that represents us when we're ready to go back and resolve our past, has been developed at this point. But we're going to watch this right here. Then Anshar raised his voice to be heard to his officer Kaka. This is something I'm not going to interpret here, but we've formed all of this ready to go back and do battle with our early self. Hear me, Kaka, my trusted officer who I can depend upon. I am sending you on a journey to go to Lamu and Lahamu. You are good at ascertaining a superlative communicator, so that the gods who are my fathers will gather here to me, so that all of the gods will be assembled here in my presence, that we may then have a discussion, gather them for a feast. Okay, this is older than Genesis. That what they're doing right here, Lamu and Lahamu is our early beginning before we developed, before time went by, before that sequence happened that we became what we became. The directive to go confer with Lamu and Lahamu would be similar in Christianity, to say, be like a child 7 days old. You're going back to an earlier time at creation before first sin. You're going back to a time where you were not yet hurt. And that is what is nested here in an older way, a more cumbersome way, I think, but it's more primitive. But it's nevertheless there. What we see is the verbiage doesn't specify that clearly. However, it could go either way. It doesn't say who it's from. But if we know that it's sequential, then we know if we don't do it in series like that, if we do it parallel, what does it mean in the spiritual search to go back to Lamu and Lahamu? That is something different. That is a split that didn't happen in the beginning. The splits happen later on in life as we have choices. We can now have positive or negative. But in the beginning, there's a point where that hasn't happened yet. And this lineage has to be that way in order to interpret it in the way that I am interpreting it. You don't have to interpret it that way. I can't find a way to put it on the template otherwise. It doesn't seem to be effective. Okay, why would he interpret it that way? It looks like it just can. And obviously, I'm doing something that is very specifically aligning the teaching onto a template very specifically, and he's obviously not doing that. You will find that the doctors out there doing this don't do that. We're doing something different. I've said before that there are a couple of different layers to this material. There's different ways of using it. People can grab it and say, it's literal, it's true, shut up, I believe it. They're the carriers. They carry the ark. There are people who look at them and say, that's ridiculous, it's baloney. They don't do us any good, but they help, keep the flames burning. I'm not in either camp because I see a template in there. The doctors and professors and whatnot, a lot of them are really ensconced in what they're doing. They've got like tunnel vision. They will focus in on their areas to the point that they don't see the similarities. Dr. Bart Ehrman, I have got stacks of material. I've spent hundreds of dollars early on, many years ago, CDs, piles of programs from the teaching company. It's done a lot different now. It's cheaper and everything else. You just download it. I've still got piles of CDs of all that early material. Comparative religions and all kinds of things. I was just really into that, listening to all the scholars, and it was fascinating. There's a point where you're doing that. But then there's a point where you go, okay, I've listened to so many different things now. I see patterns that they don't see because they are so focused in on their one area that they don't see other areas. So you begin to realize there's something else going on that they're not seeing. You've turned it inward and you're doing something different with it. So now you've got your believers, your deniers, your scholars who are trying to figure out who, what, when, and where, and why. And then there's the very few of us that are going, okay, there's a way to turn it inward and use it for self-healing. And they're all on that same pattern. But it's not for many people to see. I've reached out to the scholars, and I don't know if they've looked. Some said they would, but nobody ever got back with me. I think what we're doing at this point is so fringe that this is what is there, but it's just too unusual. There's going to be certain people that find it, and they just don't. They have something else going on. They're doing their thing. Okay, I don't see there's a problem with that, but as I'm going through the material, what I'm finding for myself is that it becomes an interactive process if you find that it is indeed on that template. If the sequence is such, like I said, where I'm liking, here's mine right here, here's how it flows. It goes from Lamu and Lahamu right there, which are the first gods, and then goes to Anshar and Kishar, who outshone the parents, and then there's the passage of time, and then the Anu of sun. If we were to, let me make a comparison here. If I was looking at Genesis and somehow putting it in the same interpretation here, we have a lot of details, but if we were looking at it without all the details we had, if those two are identical to each other, if they're both on the same template, if the Enuma Elish from Babylonia is on the same template, or created a template, and Genesis is on that template, then they have to be doing something different. If we were to interpret Genesis in the same way that he interpreted the Enuma Elish, what we would have to say is something like, in the beginning, God created Adam and Eve, and then came Cain and Abel. What does that mean? It sounds like it could be from God or not. It's just kind of vague right there. The Enuma Elish is older. We have to know that, but it is building that sequence early on. So that pattern is there. Yeah, they don't split right there. They have to stay series. You got to get back to your earlier self, and that's how it would work on the pattern. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I don't want to criticize other people's work. They're doing very important things. I've said before, there's a point where in the story of Buddha, if you know him, that story, when he left and went on his own, he began studying with everybody he could. He went to other masters and he learned everything they had and finally decided along the way that they didn't have what he was looking for, despite their expertise. That's what we're going to run into on this path. We're going to have people that are theists that are telling you that it means this, and you're like, thanks for carrying it. Atheists who tell you, no, there's nothing there at all. You're a moron for even thinking that. They don't get it either. There are people who see similarities, but they don't see why. And if you stay super focused in your one area, you might get super, super good at it, which they do. But if you were to, I'm not nearly as good as any of them. I only know a little bit. But as you start looking at a lot of different things, you go, wait a minute, these are all the same. You guys are looking so focused on one thing and not open to other things that you're not seeing how broad the similarities are. And so, yeah, anyway, okay, that's all I wanted to say on that. Those are my thoughts on it. He obviously has more going for him in this teaching arena than I do, so take it for what it's worth. I'm just coming up with ideas. I realize that. All right, love one another. See you in the next video.